This is the third video in a series of 4 that looks at setting up a login and registration system using PHP and MySQL and hashing passwords in a database. Okay, so now we're going to look at the login page, which is this one here. So currently it's just set up to use sessions, and there is a HTML form in there that is going to post some data to this location here. So it's going to be using the HTTP post method send data to this location. So in the process folder we've got check login, and that's where we're going to build our logic to test whether we've got a valid user. Okay, so a number of things that we're going to do here is first of all, in the check login page we're going to need to use sessions. So we'll include in the sessions file, so that's upper level dots into includes, and then picks up sessions where we created our session. So we've got our session starting there and our session set cookie params, which was covered in an earlier movie. And then we are also going to load in a connection file. So the assumption is that you've created a connection file and you've put your user credentials in there to connect to a database, and you've done that to create a PHP data object. So the code for that would look something like this here, to collect you up to the database. Right, so next up then is first thing to do in terms of the checks is I want to check that we've got a valid user, and the way that the database was set up in an earlier movie was that the username had to be an email. So we're going to check to see if the username and the user login value here, whether the posted value from the form, we're running that through a filter var, PHP filter var method that takes a variable and then a filter, and we want to validate that as an email. So this will tell us whether we've got a valid email address or not, and then we could build some conditional logic like so. So what this is going to say is, I'll just format this for you. So if we've got a user login, because this would return false if it's not a valid email, or it would return the email address if it was. So if we've got a good email address, great, then we're going to do another task in a second to check if it's in the database. But if it's not a valid email address, then we've got an error message. So we're going to create a session variable of login error and set it to 1. So it's just an arbitrary value being set there. And then we're going to set a referrer value of login.php. That's where we're going to bounce back to via this header redirect on line 14. Okay, if everything was good, then nothing is going to happen here at the moment, but if it wasn't a valid email, it would bounce us back to our login page. So let's just test that out, see if that works as expected. So here we are. So we're not going to put a valid email address in, and we'll apply that, and you'll see it bounces us back to this page. So for testing purposes, let's stop it redirecting if we do get a valid email address. So let me just put a little exit in here, and we'll echo out the user login. Right, so let's just try that. So we try an invalid login and it bounces us back. We try a valid email address. In terms of it looks like an email address, obviously it's just a made up one, and we can see that that value is being picked up. Okay, so we know that we can trap that logic and throw users out if they are invalid. Let's just see that if we go back to here, you can see that I have got a login error session of a value of 1. That's coming from our debugger. So in login here, we've just loaded in this little require, for debugging purposes, and that is doing a print of our session, so I can see that variable logger error being created there. Okay, so that's the first of our checks done. We've got a valid email address. Now the next thing to do is to we could put a error message back to the user. So in our login page, there's a little hint here to say this is where an error message could go. So what we're going to do is we're going to utilise the fact that we've got this session variable now with a login error value. So we can put a little condition in here. So we could say if is set session login error. So have we got an error, then we'll give them this little error message that's echo out that paragraph tag. Right, so let's try that now with the revised logic in it. Right, so test, and you see we get the error message displayed via this if condition. Okay, good. Right, so the next check then is to see whether the user login is actually in our database. So we need to make a query of the database, and this is going to use a prepare statement. So let's build this up line by line. So first of all, we are going to, so this is going to go and check login. So we've got a good email, so let's check if it's in the database. That's the next thing that we're going to do. We'll maybe dispose of those lines underneath there in a second. So we're saying select star from users, where user login equals some placeholder. So notice the colon there to indicate this is a placeholder. Then we're going to prepare this statement. So we'll prepare, that's our PHP data object, which comes from our connection file. That's our SQL string. That's our placeholder. So we'll prepare the statement with a view to then binding in our user login. So this is going to take our user login value, which is coming from our posted user login form value, and it's going to bind it into this placeholder, which is going to go into this part of the SQL statement, and it's going to go in as a string. Okay, and then we must execute that query, that statement. Oops. So let's just do stmt, and then we'll call the execute method of that object. And then we are going to also get the number of users. So we'll use the row count method to work out how many users we've got. Now the reason why we're doing that is because we know if we've got one user, we know we've got a valid user. The users table was set up in a previous movie so that usernames will be unique, so we should only expect one to match this. So therefore, as this equals 1, we know we've got a valid user. And conversely, if it equals 0, we know we've got an invalid user. So this next little bit of logic is going to say if the number of users equals 0, so we've got an invalid user, so the error here is that the email is not in the database. Then we'll set the session login error variable to 1. Again, we've just got an error, and we'll set the referrer to login to bounce it back from whence it came, and we'll also put an else clause in, so we'll say else do something else, and what we'll do there is this is where we'll put these in here for now, but that's where we will be checking to see the next stage. So do we want to check the password next? Okay, so let's test what we've got so far. Right, so I'm going to go back to the browser. I'm going to right click and inspect first of all, because I want to clear the session cookie out. So I'll go to application, find my PHP sesh ID and just delete it so that we won't have a array of login error now because we've cleared the session. Right, so let's try now with, so what we're interested in is if we have an email address but one that's not in the database. So let's just try this. It's not testing the password at this point. So that's bounced us back because it couldn't find that email address. See the errors there again. Let's delete this to get rid of the error message. We can start again. The original error message should still be there in that isn't a valid email address. So that still works fine. So we'll delete the session again. But we should have john@gmail.com in the database. Let's try that, and indeed we have, so it's fallen into this trap here. Right, okay, moving on. Next thing to do is to check that the password is correct. So inside of this new block, the first thing we'll do is we will extract a row from the database. So we can use this same query up here, this same statement, and we can fetch an object from that using the fetch object method, so we can actually find out what the database value is. So what we're after here is the hashed password from the database. So I'm going to store that into a database, which is going to call db password hash, because that's going to get from our database the user password, which will be hashed. So that's going to look something like this. So here's the password hashed, so that's what's going to get extracted from the database, and we're checking that against what the users typed in. So what we need to then do is run that through our password verify as discussed in an earlier movie. So we're going to take the password that was typed in by the user and we're going to compare that against what we've got in the database using password verify. So that'll return true if it matches. So if it returns true, great, then we can unset the error session, so that will remove the error session, and we'll create a session login of 1. Say yes, they've logged in. That's just our code for them having logged in, and then we'll set the referrer to go into our index page. That's the page that we're protecting. Now, else, if they haven't successfully password verified, what we're going to do there is then, well, let's comment this up first of all so we know what's going on at this stage. And so it doesn't match the database, so we've got a login error again, and then our referrer is to go back to the login page. So now we can comment these two out, which we're just in for testing purposes. So what have we got? We check to see if we've got a valid email address. If we have, great. We then query that email address against the database. If we find one in the database that matches that, then we take the password the user has given us and we compare it to the password from the database, which is hashed, of course. That's either just going to turn true or false. It's not going to tell us what the password was. It's just going to return true or false. If it's true, great, we'll set the session login to 1 and unset any errors that might have occurred earlier on. So notice that the login error, whatever the scenario, so whether it's the fact that the email doesn't exist, whether it's the fact that they get the password wrong, or whether it's the fact that it wasn't a valid email, in these cases we're setting this session login to 1. We're not going to give them a clue as to what they got wrong, which is going to indicate that there's been a error. Right, so let's try that on the server. So back in the server, let's just head back and let's clean things up. So we'll delete the session and we'll start again. So we've got john@gmail.com. So our user here, and we remember from earlier movie that password is actually was seeded here as that. So let's try that as our password. And that's let us in. So we've managed to log in to the system. Great. Right. So you'll notice that we've logged in. The index page that we've given you, we've got access to now. It's been protected by the sessions and authorizing the session login value there. But I've also created a little logout script. So it's an easy one to do this. So the logout script is going to process logout. So in process, we've got logout there. So the thing to watch in here is to change this to match your path again, because this is going to delete, it's going to remove the cookie that manages the login. So that needs to match the path that you had in Sessions Inc. So whatever your path was there, you need to place that in here. And so in most people's cases, it's going to be something like B, your student number, PHP encryption, assuming you saved it to a folder of that name, and then it will delete that cookie that controls the session, the PHP sesh ID. Let's just test that out. So in the browser, if I now click on log out, I've got a PHP sesh ID beginning ABS 87, so I'll log out. And it's recreated a new session ID for me with the different numbers that prove that I've now logged out, and I should be able to link. This link takes me to that index page. Notice it doesn't work, so I'm now successfully logged out. Okay, I guess I should just prove to you that if it was the wrong password, it wouldn't let me in. So it's Gmail. Let's test this again. So it's the wrong password. It doesn't let me in. What if it was the wrong username but the right password? It's not going to let me in. So we've now got a secure application, and the last move is going to build a little registration script so that we can register as well as log in.